Welcome back to Drive Your Thoughts podcast. I'm your host, Master Coach Carrie Marshall, and it's time to go after those goals.
Yeah, whether ready or not, life's coming hard, no breaks, no stop. And if you put me on the spot, don't get it twisted, I never drop. If you feel a bit out of control and out the box, here's a way that you could drive your thoughts. Turn this podcast on, it's a lock. Carrie Marshall on the clock.
Hey everybody, how are you? I am so excited for today. We are going to talk about something called secondhand feedback. So you know how much I love to say that failure is feedback, because anytime that we fail at something, what we're actually doing is we're getting feedback on what went well, what needs to change, what needs to adjust. And it's the same anytime that we actually get success as well. We're always having feedback, especially when we're talking about goals. And so today, when I talk about secondhand feedback, I want to just kind of mention a couple of things when we talk about feedback when we observe other people. So I had a client come to me just the other day, and she was talking about watching somebody fail big time in their industry. And she was kind of mentioning like why it was a big deal to her and how emotional she got watching somebody else fail in such a huge way in her industry. And so as she was telling me all of this, I said to her, what do you want to learn for yourself from observing somebody else's failure? And so she kind of listed out a couple of things. She said, I've noticed I've kind of got a little bit relaxed in my job. I actually want to kind of reevaluate, make sure that I'm always improving, not get too lazy or relaxed, and make sure that I'm always improving. And then she listed a couple of specific things. And so when we talk about secondhand feedback, what I mean is that we can really get feedback looking at our own lives as we watch other people. Now, I want you to go out and try a lot of things and fail and succeed as much as possible. But we have to remember that being in a community, being with other people, we're always going to be able to see the feedback that comes. So when I was in college, I got to be a snowboard instructor up at our local ski resort. It was so much fun. I loved it. And I got to teach kids from, I think my youngest kid that I taught was 18 months old, all the way up to my oldest client was 100 years old. So I got to see a really big range of people. But my absolute favorite group of people to coach would be these college groups that would come. So there were two colleges really close to this ski resort, Sundance, and they both had snowboard programs where the kids could actually come up and learn how to snowboard or get better at snowboarding. And so the reason that I really love this group is that, number one, it was a group of all college age kids. So they were my age. So that was really fun. But the other thing that was really fun about it is that they all didn't know each other. You might have had a couple of people that might have come and joined the group, but if there were different levels of snowboarding ability, they wouldn't be in the same group. And so we got this really fun, just every single semester during the year, we get these fun groups of kids up there to learn how to snowboard that were college age. So the reason that I'm bringing this up is that one of the things that I would always tell this group is I would tell them, hey, make sure that you're watching other people. When I tell you and teach you something new, I want you to watch how other people are doing. And then I want you to tell yourself, like, if they're struggling, like, what is it that's making them struggle? And then if they're really succeeding, like, look at their body, see what you can see, and then try and emulate it. And so what I was really asking them to do is look for secondhand feedback. And so we have to remember a couple of things about secondhand feedback. Number one is that you get to decide what their failure or success is going to mean to you, meaning that the person that's actually doing the failing might be getting some one type of feedback, but you might get something completely different from the feedback. So let me give you an example. When we're snowboarding, there's something called a side slip. Now, for any of you that have been up on the hill before with snowboarders, you know that they kind of go sideways on their board and then they'll go down the hill going, that's called a side slip. And a lot of skiers hate it because they say this, the snowboarders are pushing the snow all the way down, which is probably true. But so this side slip is like the basics of snowboarding. And if you can get up and you can learn how to balance and keep a lot of your weight kind of evenly distributed between both of your feet, what will happen is you'll just slide and glide down the hill with your snowboard sideways. So I had one particular person that could not figure out how to get her weight on both feet. So anytime she stood up, her snowboard would shoot off to the side. And so when I was working with her specifically, I was talking about weight distribution a lot. We were talking about how to feel grounded into both of your feet so that she could feel what it felt like to actually get down. So I was, of course, telling the rest of the group as I was helping her, like, hey, remember to watch, get your secondhand feedback. And so her and I went down. I helped her as much as I could. And as I did, I was holding her hands because I wanted her to be able to kind of just be able to get up enough and slide enough to start to feel that. And so when we got down to the bottom and then everyone else came by after us, somebody said, oh, I can see the difference when I weight distribution. And so I was like, okay, so what's your secondhand feedback? And we kind of went through the group. And one of the guys there went from being like a really good snowboarder. I didn't ask him right then what his secondhand feedback was, but he went from that side slip, he did fine. And then the next little exercise that we did, he struggled and struggled and struggled. And I was like, what is happening here? Like he was doing so good. And so the next time down, I was like, hey, Adam, why don't you ride with me? You're doing something weird. I can't figure it out. So let's kind of work on it. And he was like, oh, okay. And so then I was helping him. He kept falling and I was like, what is happening? So I was like, okay, we're going to do this together. I have to figure out what's going on. And so I held his hands and we were doing something. And then he started laughing and he goes, do you know what my secondhand feedback was when you were helping Chloe? And I was, sitting there, we're both sliding together down the hill. And I'm like, what? We're snowboarding as he says this. He goes, my secondhand feedback was, I can hold your hand if I'm struggling. And I just bursted out laughing. I thought that was so funny. But the reason that I'm telling you this story is Chloe, when we were doing her, snowboarding together, we were really, really working on her weight distribution. But somebody else got a completely different feedback, which is like, hey, if I want to flirt with the snowboard instructor, then I should maybe struggle a little bit because then she'll give me a little bit more attention, which is so funny, but it's a silly example. But the reason I wanted to bring that up is because you really can get different feedback from the exact same experience that you're watching and observing someone else go through, and then you might get something else from it. And so always remember when we're getting secondhand feedback, it's not that you're going to be emulating that exact person, but it's that you're going to be asking yourself the question of, what do I see here? What am I getting from this? So the second thing with secondhand feedback is you want to make sure that it's 100% customized to you. So often what we do is we listen to somebody else getting feedback or we hear their feedback, but it's not for us. So let me give you an example of this. When I was going through Master Coach training, we had a big group of us that were all trying to certify at the same time. And we had a Slack group. So in a Slack group, you can message each other and things like that. So the instructor that was helping us would actually message everyone somebody's individual feedback. So for instance, my friend Natalie would get some feedback and we'd all be able to read through it. Well, at one point, I was struggling to get certified and I was reading somebody else's feedback. And so I started to do what they were asking that person to do. And the instructor came and was messaging me and she's like, what happened? She's like, you were doing so well. You were really close. You had one small thing to tweak. And I was like, well, you told Candace to do this. And she was like, that was for Candace. She's like, anytime that you hear somebody else's feedback, you need to realize that maybe that's not the customized feedback for you. So when we talk about getting secondhand feedback, once again, it needs to not come just from listening and observing somebody else, but it also needs to come from like, where am I at? Because you might be somewhere completely different. And so make sure that when we have secondhand feedback, that it's actually personalized to you, meaning that you're putting it through the filter of like, what's important to me here? Why does this feel important to me? One of the best things about secondhand feedback is that I think that there's a lot that we can learn. And studies have been done about how people actually learn, and we all learn differently, right? So we might have somebody that's a tactile learner or something like that, audible learner. And so then the second thing to remember is make sure that when we're getting secondhand feedback, it's how you like to get secondhand feedback. So if you find that you, like my client yesterday, we were really talking about like, well, when you saw that feedback coming in, what did you want to do? And she's like, well, I needed to write everything down because that's how she likes to learn. And she likes to go through things and make sure that it's all written down. So when we talk about goals, one of the ways to kind of like hack your goal is to kind of get this secondhand feedback. Look out into the landscape of the goal that you're wanting to do and see if there's anybody else that has done it, what they have learned from it, and then what you can learn from it, which might be a little bit of a different variation of what they have. So when we talk about going after your goal, I want you to just kind of remember that you don't have to do the big thing, the failure, the success, whatever it is, mostly the failures. Sometimes you can just go out and get the secondhand feedback so that you can actually up level faster than you did before. I hope this has been helpful. We'll see you next time. Bye. Thanks for listening to this podcast episode. If you're ready to get in the driver's seat of your own life, you can come and follow me at Drive Your Thoughts Coaching on Instagram, or come and see more ways to work with me at driveyourthoughts.com.
Yeah, whether ready or not, life's coming hard, no breaks, no stop. And if you put me on the spot, don't get it twisted, I never drop. If you feel a bit out of control and out the box, here's a way that you could drive your thoughts. Turn this podcast on, it's a lock. Carrie Marshall on the clock.